I sat at the table, looking at my watch and the notes of my prepared speech. By now, it was purely habit. I knew the words I wanted to use by heart and had done for some weeks. I knew what I was about to do constituted a not inconsiderable risk, but I felt like I had to do it. I regretted that it had come to this, but my husband had brought it on himself. What choice did I have? Was my husband going to enjoy what I planned? No, I knew he liked to always be in control, and I was about to strip him of that. I was going to have to make a choice and bend him to my will. I leaned back in my chair as I awaited his return home. He had no idea of the ambush I had prepared for him. I know what you're thinking. I was going to sit him down and announce I have a lover. Then I was going to insist that he either goes along with it or I dump his ass and clean him out. Well, you'd be wrong. I wasn't going to announce I'm divorcing him or request a trial separation so I can mess around on him. I had no desire to knock him out just so I could tie him up and humiliate him by being intimate with him. I wasn't going to dump him or ask for a separation just so I could mess around on him. And I certainly wasn't going to announce I was divorcing him or knock him out just so I could tie him up and humiliate him. His best friend. And I'm not going to insult his integrity by suggesting I was there to announce that I found out about his affair so I could have a revenge intimacy or two. My husband is the most loving, sweet, but above all loyal man it has ever been my privilege to meet. This was not the... I looked over at my accomplice, who was 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and had a tattoo. He was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, just inside the front entrance. I didn't pick him for his brain power, did I? I looked over at him. I checked my watch again. Almost showtime. Right on cue, I heard Dave's keys in the front door lock. I nodded at Matt and watched him disappear into the shadows. I put on my best smile. Dave opened the door and, without looking inside, shut it behind him. It wasn't until he had turned that I realized. He looked up again and took 2 steps towards me. His face fell. "What are you doing in my apartment?" he asked. The 6 feet 4 inches man stepped behind my husband and clamped a wet cloth over Dave's mouth and nose. I watched sadly as he struggled, looking really alarmed at how long this was taking. In the movies, those chloroformed passed out immediately. In reality, my husband struggled and thrashed, his eyes rolling around as he tried to see his attacker. But the huge biker knew what he was doing. It must have been at least 2 distressing minutes before Dave changed tactics. He momentarily appeared to relax, then lifted his right foot and stomped down. I think his intention was to hit the top of Matt's foot, but he misjudged and instead hit the biker's shin. I cringed at the reflected pain as even I like him big and stupid winced quickly as Matt's plan was abandoned. He released Dave with one arm and spun him around, hammering a fist under my husband's chin. Dave saw it coming but was too groggy to protect himself. Finally, I saw his eyes slowly cross and he slumped. In Matt's arm. Oh well, it was the same effect either way. Matt and I, who had rehearsed the move, lifted my husband, who was still out, and carried him into the master bedroom. 5 minutes and 4 ropes later, the job was done. I thanked Matt and paid him the last $200 I owed him for completing the task. He pocketed the money and left, patting his pocket to make sure he had his lockpicks. I sat on the side of the bed and looked at my husband's face while I stroked his brow. I suddenly realized that he was turning blue. His back had caused him to swallow his tongue. I tried to open his mouth, but it wouldn't budge. I put my hand under his neck and lifted a bit. I heard and felt air rushing into his lungs. I slowly relaxed as I waited for him to come out of his mat-induced swoon. His face started to look a bit more normal again. I just had to wait until he came out of his mat-induced swoon. It was still a good 10 minutes before his eyes started to flicker. I just sat there stroking his brow. Finally, his eyes opened fully. He lunged upwards but was pulled back by the ropes. His head thrashed from side to side, looking at his bonds. Finally seeing he was helpless, he stopped thrashing and just started yelling for help as loud as he could. I had anticipated this, so I slapped him as hard as I could to stun him a little. Then I reached for the I'd hoped we could talk like civilized human beings, but if you're going to be unreasonable, then a one-sided conversation will have to do. I stopped when I'd finished tying the gag and looked once again at the face I'd loved for 23 years. I took a deep breath and imagined my notes in my head. Darling, I started talking. Something was wrong again. He appeared to be unconscious. Come on, I didn't slap him that hard. His eyes were rolled. I was back in his head and his body was kind of vibrating. I thought my slap had triggered something. I just sat and stared at this bizarre behavior in my panic. I thought I could undo whatever it was I'd done by slapping him again. I jumped up and straddled his chest and brought my hand back to administer my medicine. I'm sorry, darling. This wasn't. I was suddenly tackled to the floor from behind. I looked up and saw another woman, who I hadn't expected to see there. She was a little taller than me and quite beautiful with flaming red hair. She was a good deal younger and obviously fitter, just like I was before. My athletic body had been allowed to run. I ended up on the floor, pinned in some sort of wrestling or martial arts hold. The pressure around my throat was intense, but I could breathe. I knew that a little more time might change things, so I let my body go limp and just stared up into her startling green eyes. She let me up, saying she'd let me go if I promised to talk to my husband. To my boyfriend, I want to see what's wrong with him. Try to interfere, and believe me, I will break both your arms. I've called the police, so go or stay. I don't care. Do you understand? The pressure remained until I nodded. She jumped up and looked at Dave. His condition was still the same. She quickly put her head to his chest. I listened and saw the color drain from her pretty face. She jumped up, grabbed the phone and called an ambulance. As soon as she hung up, she grabbed a knife and cut Dave's bonds while screaming at me to help drag him onto the floor. I was starting to panic. What's going on? His heart is beating, but it's all over the place. I can't do CPR on the bed. What did you do to him? A friend of mine knocked him out, but he had to. Dave just wouldn't go out from the chloroform. The tall redhead paused again while she listened to Dave's chest. Why did you chloroform him? Is this your way of getting him back? That's not a nice plan. I know he will never have me back, not after what I did. He's far too proud for that. Any further discussion was cut short when 2 policemen rushed into the apartment. The Hellcat quickly outlined what had happened and one of the policemen quietly arrested me as I was led to the door. I was overwhelmed with worry, terror and frustration. I just wanted to tell him why. He has to listen, he has to forgive me. I was taken to the police station and put in a holding cell for what seemed like hours. They'd offered to call a lawyer for me, but I knew I couldn't afford one. I'd spent just about all my savings on divorce lawyers until I'd accepted that Dave was gone forever. I was still terrified. What if Dave was dead? Then I'd never be able to explain why I did what I did and would never get his forgiveness. Finally, I was taken to an interview room where 2 detectives sat me down and turned on a tape machine. I saw no harm in agreeing to be taped while being interviewed, but that was as far as my cooperation was going to go. I just answered the first 3 questions. I'm not answering that because it might incriminate me. The 2 detectives were talking about getting a legal aid lawyer for me when there was a knock at the door. A 3rd detective popped his head around the door. My girlfriend is here and wants to speak to you, Grace. The 2 original detectives left and the tall redhead came in. She came into the room and sat down opposite me. I introduced myself as Wendy Dormer. I asked her, "Is Dave okay here?" "No," she replied. "I'm here to tell you that he won't live. Your little chloroform trick gave him cardiac arrhythmia. The doctors say that he'll be fine until his heart rate lifts above normal. Then he will just pass out. They're going to let him rest for a while, then stop his heart. There's a 90% chance he'll be back to normal if they restart it. Otherwise, it's a pacemaker for the rest of his life." I took the opportunity to look at her. She was statuesque in a bimbo kind of way with a body that I would have been happy to have at her age. One look in her eyes told me that although she was my superior in every physical aspect, she was still a person. I had the upper hand in terms of intellect, so I was curious as to why she was there. She answered my question. Karen, this has to stop. When are you going to understand that Dave doesn't care why you slept with him? He just wants a divorce and to move on with his life, but he has to listen to me. I replied, no, he doesn't. You need to tell him, but there's no law that says he has to listen. From what he's told me, you and he had a normal life until he came home and found you with another man. He said that as far as he was concerned, you'd opted out of the marriage and he wants nothing more to do with you. But he owes it to me to just listen to why I did what I did. I know he and I are finished, but he has to forgive me. After he moved out, I tried phoning him, but he never answered. I also tried emails, but they just disappeared into the ether, and I never heard anything. I sent him a letter, but he just returned it unopened. I even tried a registered letter, but he refused to accept it. It's so frustrating. I tried costing him at his work, but he just refused to listen and called security. I tried explaining it to his mom, but she just called me names and hung up. I even tried getting my parents to step in, but they said they didn't want anything to do with me. That hurt, but it was nothing compared to when my kids refused to talk to me. My last attempt was to refuse to sign the divorce papers unless he sat down with me. 1. He just stopped the process. It's so frustrating. If I could just tell him why I did it, then we could all move on and people would just start talking to me again. She asked anyone, what do you think? I replied, yes, I can see it would be frustrating. Let me tell you, Dave was disappointed that the kids took the attitude they did. He tried to tell them they shouldn't judge you or the crimes you've committed. The thing is, they committed crimes against him, not against them. But they're adults now, and they can form their own opinions. They're good kids. My two get on really well. When did you see them? Did you go to Sydney? No, they were here last week. It's the second semester break. She let the news that my own children were in town but didn't come to see me sink in. Look, Karen, if it's going to save Dave's life and stop you doing this, I'm willing to listen. Actually, I'd be happy to listen to you now. I promised to try to get Dave to hear me out. I seriously considered her offer. I stared at her innocent, slightly vacuous expression. What the hell? I had nothing to lose and lots to gain. The police had only a circumstantial case with only Dave as a direct witness. I knew I could rely on his good nature not to press charges against me if this happened. If I made a statement, I'd just deny it. In my business life, I had two idiots like her on the payroll every day. I decided to sound her out on one of the minor justifications I'd prepared. I told her I was a virgin when we married. I'd always thought I might have been missing out on something. Dave thought it might be something like that, but he said that getting married a virgin. He said he'd put gentle pressure on you to give it up. He even flagged it as a potential problem way back then. I agreed with him that it would be grossly unfair for you to use that as a reason when it was your choice back then. Wendy's interruption caught me by surprise. She was being a little more forceful than I'd expected. That was nothing to the surprise that followed. I don't believe you were just getting even for Dave playing away or neglecting you. The kids told me that growing up, he was always attentive to you and spent all his free time with you and them. I don't believe he cheated on you first. I know him well enough to say that he is the most loyal, trustworthy, honorable, and respected man I have ever met. He would never disrespect you, not after you threw him away. I was starting to get annoyed with this woman's naivety. I knew my voice was louder and shriller than I meant it to be, but I was beyond caring. Well, that was the problem, wasn't it? Respect. I've got a degree from Fring University. Dave never made it past high school. I clawed myself up the corporate ladder after taking off 10 years. Dave gets promoted to foreman and it's like everyone thinks he's been elected president. I hang around with smart business professionals who drive BMWs and dress nicely. He hangs around with sweaty blue-collar workers who drive forwards. He gets to eat what he likes and still looks good while I diet and still end up looking like a pudgy middle-aged housewife. Even after the facelift and the boob job, everyone likes Dave, everyone respects Dave, everyone wants to be with Dave. I hate it. I paused to try to lower my voice below the screech. When I got a promotion last year to group manager, all my own parents could say was that with all the money they'd spent on my education. They expected nothing less, but that didn't stop them from raving about Dave's bonus. I earned more in 3 weeks than Dave's bonus was for the entire year. It just wasn't fair. That year, I spent a lot of money on a hairdo, makeup, and a dress for my company's Christmas party. When I showed up, all anyone had to say was, "Where's Dave? Do you have any idea what it's like to? You know you're better than your husband in every way, but your parents seem to like him more than you do." Wendy shook her head. Karen thought Wendy was the kind of person she most hated. She was the sporty bimbo at school who had her pick of the boys. She was the vacuous type who hung around her husband at parties and laughed at his crude jokes. While she was trying to impress people with her knowledge and intellect, the ones that agreed with him whenever there was a dispute, even when her argument was superior, not just the women but all the guys as well. The ultimate humiliation was when after one argument Dave came to her defense against the mob. The argument had been about staying. At the moment, it's not looking good. Home Mums Dave had jumped in and praised her as a mother who had given up her career to give her kids a good home. His comments on how well she looked after her kids had the opposite effect. She, the group manager, had to be rescued by a foreman. Well, after a while, I really started to resent it. I tried to prove I was better in just some small way, but it backfired. It made me look competitive and worse, it made people rally around Dave. In the end, I decided there was only one way to get one over on Dave. I would take a lover if I could keep an affair secret from Dave. Then it would prove I was better than he was, just to me. I would find someone who was a better lover than him and who would give me more pleasure. I could have a secret fling with someone and Dave wouldn't know. That wasn't much of a challenge, was it, Karen? Dave is so open and trusting that you could have had a secret fling with someone right next to him and Dave wouldn't have noticed. How long did this go on for? She asked 3 guys over 6 months. I replied, "Wow, Dave. He thought it was just the one. What were you hoping for in the end?" "I'm not sure. It was satisfying getting one. I managed to keep it on the down low, but the intimacy was awful. When I married, I had no idea that Dave was bigger and better than most men. The guys didn't care about my pleasure, it was just wham, bang, thank you, Mom. I only went with the first 2 a couple of times. The third guy, who I worked with, was the only one even remotely up to Dave's standards. So why didn't you give it up?" I was asked this because if I did, then Dave would have one again. I felt I had to keep going until I had better intimacy with someone than the intimacy I had with Dave. Then I could have retired, no longer needing to know I'd had better intimacy than Dave had ever had. I could have stopped knowing something Dave never would. I was training the third guy, John, up with everything I like best. I could see this logic just wasn't registering with Wendy. You got what was coming to you. You should have been studying at school, not flirting with the whole football team. So, what really happened, Karen? What you're telling me doesn't match what Dave said. He figured you wanted to be caught, so he came home at his usual time and caught you having sex on the couch. Of course, I didn't want to get caught. I knew Dave would throw me out on my ear if he'd ever found out. I realized John would never get me to where I wanted to be. So I came up with another plan. Dave had intimated with me a couple of times a few hours after I'd been with other guys. It was kind of hot, but still not what I wanted. I made the mistake of reading some stories about humiliation online. There was one about a woman who had her lover finish in her, then got her husband to eat her. A short time later, I was really drawn into this story. I knew this was what I was looking for. If I could pull this off, my obsession would be over, no matter how afraid I felt. From then on, I would remember Dave humiliating himself that day. So, I took the Monday off and invited John to come over in the afternoon. The plan was for him to give me at least 2 good loads just before Dave came home. I set an alarm for 4:55, knowing that Dave always came home right on the dot at 5:30. I was going to lie on the couch and invite him to dine when he walked in the door. As luck would have it, he came home early without ringing. I stopped realizing that in my anger and frustration I had departed wildly from my script. He didn't actually come home early, Karen. If you'd been at work that day, you'd have realized that you and Dave had forgotten the start of daylight savings. He turned up to work an hour late but left at normal time. He said he'd rung and left a message on your cell. She replied yes. I answered. I really don't know why you thought. All that was needed, Karen, was for me to talk to Dave a lot about this. I helped him to heal, and at no time did he ever give me the impression that he thought he was superior to you. In fact, he worshipped the ground you walked on. When I've spoken to your parents, they've always given me the impression that apart from this incident, they were very proud of you. I know now that most of it was in my head, but it seemed so real at the time. That's what I wanted to tell Dave all along, but he just wouldn't listen. So you cooked up this little scheme to make him listen to you. How was it supposed to go? Well, I found out where Dave was living and hired a friend of a friend to help me tie him up so he would be forced to listen. I bought some chloroform on the internet. I was going to break into Dave's apartment when he came in. My friend was going to chloroform him and help me tie him up. It didn't work out that way, though. The chloroform didn't knock him out, and he started to lash out. My friend had to knock him out with his fist. Then we tied him up, but just after he started coming around, he had that strange fit thing. I slapped him to get him to pay attention, and that was when you burst in. You will keep your promise, won't you, Wendy? You will tell Dave why I did it, won't you? Before I answer that, Karen. I just wanted to ask how you think your scheme turned out. She asked, well, Dave won again, didn't he? I'm not going to tell Dave what you said. I don't think he needs to know. I didn't understand it myself. It might hurt him more if he finds out. Maybe I'll tell him when he's stronger. She answered while I was calling her a reneging. She was twirling her index finger in a circle while pointing at the ceiling. I didn't think much of it until the door opened and the original two detectives one of them walked straight to the tape recorder on the table, hit stop and retrieved both tapes. Well done, Sergeant Dormer. It was a pretty unusual tactic, but it got us a plain confession of breaking and entering, assault, conspiracy and unlawful restraint. We'll have to see how Mr. Brown goes after the operation to see what other charges we can come up with. Thanks, Rex. I know Dave will hate this, but the only way he will ever be able to relax after this is if this madman is safely behind bars. She turned just before. When you get out, Karen, please respect Dave's wish to never see you again. I was too bewildered to even answer. Was I smarter than anyone? That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.